This is Permissionless Liberty.
Welcome to Permissionless Liberty. I'm Jake Klein, here with your hosts, Adam Knott and Dan Sanchez. And I am kicking it off today because the show is going to go on hiatus for a little bit, which is a little sad. But because of that, we wanted to take this opportunity to run through, this is the 32nd episode of Permissionless Liberty, to run through all the biggest disagreements that Dan and Adam have had over the course of this show and kind of see how has their thinking changed. There are two visions of libertarianism here, which mostly agree with each other, but have had a lot of disagreements that have been worked out over the course of this show. And so we wanted to just take this opportunity for the future to put a marker in the ground and say, this is what each of you think, and then we can see how those views hold up to the test of time in the future, how they might evolve as Adam and Dan develop as people. And so that's what we're going to do here today. I'm going to ask a series of questions that are primed to bring out those disagreements and, get their thoughts out that they've been discussing over the course of the show and see how that's crystallized. So I think before we get into those disagreements, first what we should do is, of course, there's way more agreement, much of which can go unspoken sometimes, that you guys have than disagreement. So where do you think you most agree with each other? And you really see the world very much in the same way. Adam, why don't you go first in answering that?
Well, thank you, Jake. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Well, I, will speak for myself, how I see it. I think Dan and I agree that as libertarians, that we don't see the solution, social problems being solved by adding further laws. I think we would agree on that. We both agree that society is not going the direction that we would like. And we also agree that we come from a tradition that maybe even implicitly, because we haven't talked about it a lot, but it's a virtuous tradition that seeks to apply reason to, we want to justify our positions with reason. As the founders did, to appeal to mankind with our plea and tell them why we're doing what we're doing. So I think both Dan and I are examples of the intellectual response to the growth of government and the intellectual atmosphere that views social arrangements from a government perspective. That's the time we're living in now. So it's almost inconceivable to our fellow citizens any kind of society other than the one we have now, which is heavily dependent on government, where government is responsible for 50% of basically taking over 50% of what used to be decided by individuals. And our contemporaries see that as normal and are not resisting a further increase in that. Whereas to me, I see that as abnormal or as undesirable. And every increase in that, to me, is is retrogressing socially. So to me, I see that the agreement between Dan and I is very broad, coming from the libertarian tradition, which as we've covered pretty well historically, where it came from in the Western world, from John Locke and the English and I guess the continental or Scottish, English, and French philosophers, classical liberals. And we come from that proud tradition that a government, a command society has impacted us personally, and we, in a sense, reject it. But since that's the time we're living in, what do we do? And that's what we both have an idea about what to do, and we're doing it. So we both made our case. Well, here's what's happening. Here's where I want to go. Here's what we're doing about it. So we've laid that out, I think, in the episodes we've done. But I guess my answer to close it off is that we both come from a very proud and very virtuous libertarian tradition. And we are both interested intensely in furthering and enhancing that movement and doing our part and playing a part in that. And we're both proud of trying to contribute and hopefully leave that movement better than when we found it. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Dan, your turn. So where do you think you most agree with Adam?
Yeah, so our agreement goes way back in the Mises Forum days. We kind of bonded over our shared appreciation of Ludwig von Mises's work, especially regarding praxeology. And so I think that we have similar premises in terms of a Misesian epistemology and a Misesian approach to economics and economic reasoning. And so for that reason, we really agree a lot on economics, on economic freedom. I mean, one of Adam's examples that he has given for his ideas relates to the minimum wage. Also, medical freedom. I know that that the lockdowns and around COVID, that that was just a huge sort of wake up call to Adam in terms of how bad it was getting, how quickly. I mean, not a wake up call in the sense of like him changing his mind or on anything. I mean, I'm sure he's always been, you know, pro medical freedom, but yeah, I mean, I like Adam, and presumably like you, Jake, and unfortunately not like a lot of libertarians, because a lot of libertarians kind of fell for the paranoia and the hysteria of thinking that, okay, well, we need an exception because this is a pandemic, and that we need the lockdowns, and we need vaccine mandates. So yeah, so we share that in common, that we totally did not fall for that, proudly so. And I would say also kind of a one thing that has made this podcast delightful is that we also come from similar premises in terms of discourse and the way to advance the ideas through civil discourse and sticking to the ideas and being very cool in our reasoning. And so, that has been a commonality that has helped us to learn from each other in terms of our non-commonality, because we were able to question each other's positions and make counterpoints to each other's positions, without getting defensive and without like having it be uncivil. And so yeah, so I think that those are some really big ways in which we have common ground.
And most of all, you're both libertarians, and you both hate the state, and you both want it somewhere between limited government and no government. So I I think it goes far beyond any of these disagreements that we are about to get to. But I'm going to start with, I think, maybe the biggest disagreement that has permeated the entire scope of the podcast. What do you think is the most important thing to do to achieve liberty? Is it focusing on education, or is it focusing on building and doing? Dan, why don't you start with this one?
Yeah, so education has always been my main approach. So, self-education was what got me into this world in the first place. That, I was just curious about these libertarian ideas, and so I just went down the Mises and Rothbard rabbit hole of and just becoming fascinated with Austrian economics and libertarian political philosophy, and just wanting to teach myself about it, like, through and through. And it was just like this huge self teaching project that led to me becoming a writer in this field, largely for the sake of learning. Like, even though I was very pleased to see that my articles helped teach, um, really the main impetus was trying to wrap my head around these ideas through writing, of like organizing and distilling and clarifying these ideas so that I really could master them myself. And so that ultimately led to a job at the Mises Institute, um, and starting the Mises Academy, which is like an online education, liberty education platform. I'm pretty sure it was the first one ever. And when I started that, I did a blog post for Mises, sort of announcing it, kind of like a mission statement manifesto type blog post for it, and I called it the Misesian Injunction. And so I wrote about Mises's theory of social change, and how the Mises Academy was intended to further that. And Mises's belief was that ideas rule the world, and that whatever the prevailing ideology is among the masses, um, that is going to determine whether we have freedom or not. And that, you know, politicians basically have to, you know, trim their sails to those prevailing winds of popular ideology. And so that the only way to achieve freedom would is to is through education, so that that ideology can change. Um, and then I moved to FEE, and at the Foundation for Economic Education, and learned more about the ideas of the founder of FEE, Leonard Read. And Read agreed with Mises about public opinion and ideology. He likened politicians to thermometers, and so at most that they kind of are gauges of public opinion, but they don't determine public opinion. But he also really stressed what he called influential public opinion, that's what really matters. And that is a very small, in what he called an infinitesimal minority of the public, that actually understands these ideas, because he agreed with Albert J. Nock that you can't expect like John Doe. You can't expect the masses to really fully understand these ideas. That really it's the thought leaders that understand these ideas, and the masses kind of follow their leadership. And that's what has happened whenever there's any kind of mass uh, revolution in the way a society is governed, whether to the good or to the ill. Whether we're talking about the American Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution, that you know the average farmer in America couldn't recite Locke chapter and verse necessarily, and neither could the average farmer in Russia recite Karl Marx. But they um, respected and followed the intellectual leadership of those who did, those who very clearly had a philosophy and had sort of a plan for society, and they trusted that those people knew what they were talking about, because like the American founders knew Locke chapter and verse, and the um, Bolshevik revolutionaries knew Marx chapter and verse, and their Locke and Marx provided like a very clear philosophies for arranging society. They weren't just it wasn't just a matter of just flying by the seat of their pants. That there was like some kind of a blueprint, um, and so one thing that has kind of evolved is that for me, whereas at when before I had studied Leonard Read, it was kind of more of a mass education project for me. But for me now, having read Leonard Read, I really understand it more as a matter of cultivating what Albert J. Nock called the remnant, that infinitesimal minority. Reed called it 10,000 Bastiats. That if we could get a thought leadership of 10,000 like Bastiat juniors who really understood these ideas well enough to explain them and to provide that thought leadership, that's what it would take to have like another American Revolution towards liberty. But ultimately, the way that you can teach those Bastiats is by becoming a Bastiat yourself, becoming a mini Bastiat yourself. That ultimately it comes down to self-improvement, that you have to make sure that you understand these ideas, or I have to make sure that I understand these ideas. And what that one way of understanding these ideas is by writing and speaking them out. And the more your writing and speaking is about really understanding the ideas, the more it will attract a readership and an audience. Um, but the more like you're just writing and speaking for the sake of propaganda, and as opposed to truth seeking and learning, like the less of a lasting influence you're going to have on society. And so like the way I boiled it down is what I call the Reed doctrine, is Leonard Reed's doctrine, is that what liberty needs most are leaders who lead by teaching, and teachers who teach by learning out loud. And it really resonated with me, because like from the beginning, that's how I taught, was by learning out loud. Like when I was first writing these articles and first developing Mises Academy courses, like what really drew me to it was like, oh, I can I can work out like an understanding of the business cycle by like designing this syllabus for this course, and I could understand, Mises's epistemology by laying it out in this article, like that article that we went over in a previous essay. So yeah, so that's my calling and my mission. Like that's why I do what I do. Um, and but even though that's different from Adam's um, emphasis, like I I do think there is a lot of utility in that, um, and I do think that like both education and building something can work in tandem. So that could be a good segue for Adam to talk about his um, that emphasis.
Jake, do you mind repeating the question just so I'm clear on it?
Yeah, the question was, what's most important for building a free society? Is it educating, or is it building and doing?
I guess based on what we talked about the last several months, my interest is trying to see if we can actually initiate or establish something in our lifetime. So whether it's my lifetime or you guys' lifetime, but not letting the centuries tick by and letting it happen just kind of by happenstance, by revolution and war, but actually by human initiative, the same way that Bitcoin came about, through human initiative, see if we can actually get something started. So to me, one way that somebody could think about it, who's out there, who's let's say a young libertarian, is try to see if you can eliminate possible paths as a way to have your theory, have you intellectually arrive at what you should be doing, because it will be among the few alternatives remaining when you rule out some things that you deem that are not going to be working. So to me, I mean, Dan and I probably agree that we're not going to vote our way to freedom. So I would say that you probably, so that's one thing I would eliminate, that you would be trying to work to achieve a voting majority in order to achieve liberty. I think you're not going to achieve liberty that way. I'd rule out violence, violent revolution. I'd rule out a collapse of society with libertarianism being built after this collapse of society. I've ruled out 3 things already. I would rule out argumentation, trying to change non-libertarians to become libertarians. Empirically, you can see that it doesn't work, because collectivism is a fully developed system parallel to libertarianism. It has its own interpretation of every single thing that libertarianism interprets. So there's no way to have the last word in an argument like that. The collectivists will come back at you with their own interpretation on every social phenomenon. So that leaves one thing where Dan and I disagree a little bit about, and that leaves education. I have more to say about that, but just for our current discussion, I would say let's just say that education is not going to work, because we had Patrick on, and he gave the example of Hazlitt, who had written 10,000 articles and 10 million words, and the world, over 50 years, and the world had become more socialist. That was 1960. Now, 60 years later, we've had all of the scholars that we admire, the whole Mises Institute gamut of intellectuals, and we basically were 10 inches away from communism 3 years ago. So the arguments aren't working. So I would say to anybody who was thought that they were a libertarian and wanted to somehow, if they're interested in actualizing libertarianism, meaning actually getting to have some sort of tangible libertarian existence, that they should try to figure out how to bring about that, given those 5 or 6 things I just said, assuming that those aren't going to work. If somebody wants to take issue with me, say, no, Adam, those are going to work, we just haven't done it well enough, then fine. I mean, then good luck. But I would say, I would assume that those 5 or 6 things are not going to work. Now what remains? So now you have a foundation from which with to start. You know what won't work. So now what can you do that is not that? And that those will be things that haven't been tried because the 5 or 6 things I just said have been tried. I can find libertarians who are hoping for society to collapse. I can find libertarians who are trying to educate. I can find libertarians who are so mad they want to have a revolution. I can find libertarians who are trying to get votes, and these things are not working. So what needs to be tried is what hasn't been tried. Well, what are those things? I challenge any budding libertarian or or libertarian intellectual who's young and hasn't yet, maybe still deciding on how they want to impact the world, to consider what I've just said.
So, one of the things you brought up in there is something I had another question about, which is can a committed non libertarian, a collectivist, be persuaded out of that view? Or, they just have different values and, there's nothing to be able to persuade them away from the values that they have. The values are fixed, basically. Um, so I want to give Dan a chance to respond to that. But before I do, Adam, since now, that's more the focus of this question, is there anything you want to elaborate on about that beyond what you already said?
Sure. Two things come to mind. We all are familiar with, somebody who has some sort of disorder, alcoholism, and it's just common wisdom that you can't help that person until they want help. So uh, if that person doesn't believe they have a drinking problem, it's going to be hard to argue them out of drinking. But the second thing is, I have a great example, and that's the same idea though. An honest person who's honest with themselves, and their observations aren't matching the philosophy they've been subscribing to, will of their own accord start to change their mind. We've talked about Anna Kasparian. She's a ferocious leftist, or was a ferocious leftist, and I've witnessed her give her partial rejection of the ideology she had been subscribing to and was being fed. And she compared it to she compared the description of the people she knew with what she knew about them, and came to the conclusion that something wasn't right in what her ideology was, and the ideology of her faction. So it's not that people can't change, but I guess if you want me to, be more specific, if somebody's committed and they haven't reached the point where they need help, or where they have noticed themselves, they're not reachable. That just empirically speaking, I'm not going to say categorically. It's not a praxeological law that they're not reachable. It's a 1 in a million. So you're telling me there's a chance? It's a 1 in a million chance that somebody who's fully committed, ideologically committed, go to Chuck Schumer and go to Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren and try to talk them into becoming a libertarian, and it's not going to work. So it's not that people can't change. The COVID pandemic, I've mentioned several times, manufactured libertarians, because it made people wake up and realize that the left was not for free speech or medical freedom. And so they did start to change their views. We know, Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk, Vinay Prasad, I'll take the liberty of saying that he was a leftist, Brett Weinstein. These are important people in the world. And they realized Mark Andreessen was in meetings with people he used to support as a leftist and as a Democrat. And they basically said, "We're coming after you." They basically told him he's on notice and he should get out of the businesses he's thinking of getting into. And he realized something was terribly wrong, and he changed his orientation quick. So it happens, but I think it only happens when the person themselves realize it. No amount of me trying to argue. I can find all the people who need to have their minds changed, and none of them are going to change their mind.
Dan, your response?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with the point that Adam made about they have to be seeking truth. and they have to be open to it, because that's another thing that Leonard Reed would say, is that you can't impose your wisdom on someone else. That that someone has to be, um, each person, he said, like, controls, like, the gateway to their mind, and if it's closed off, there's nothing that you can do to force the lock. Like, you can offer keys, like he used the key analogy, but they have to, like, of their own will, entertain the idea and try the key themselves. Um, and and so yeah, so there's no way, like, with a lot of collectivists, like, debating is futile in terms of winning them over, because they're just closed-minded, and when they're debating, they're just debating to win, and or to at least make you look bad to spectators. And so the best that you can hope for in those situations is to look good to spectators, to for people who are watching the interaction to, be convinced that you had the better argument, and that they can move towards liberty. But a lot of people are just, like, dyed in the wool, and that they're not, um, you know, in a place of their, like, intellectual journey where they're open to that. But I don't think that that means that they never will become open to that. I think that, just empirically, we've seen that. I mean, when you think about it, how many more libertarians there are now than there were even just in, like, the year 2000, just like um, in the past quarter century. I mean, it's just been explosive growth. Like, I remember, like, when I first became a libertarian, that most people hadn't even heard the word, let alone to actually be one. And now there's just, like, this huge movement, and you don't get that kind of explosive growth without former collectivists becoming individualists, becoming libertarians. So, just by that empirical fact alone, like, it just shows that people are capable of change. Um, and so, like, it to me, it's just a matter of, like, doing more of that faster. There's always going to be a certain degree of lag, because, like, even though Mises and Reed were correct that, the prevailing opinion is what dictates ultimately what policy is going to be. The the and that even though Leonard Reed is right that, you know politicians are basically thermometers of public opinion, like, you know as like, explosive as libertarian growth has been, it's still a minority. And so it would take, you know, much more explosive growth for libertarian opinion to have that kind of sway over what kind of society we have, and what kind of and so it's just so it's so that's why I think that, like, it's kind of premature to think that we're going to achieve liberty without a more libertarian society. And that's why Leonard Reed likened expecting libertarian political leadership without a libertarian prevailing opinion. It's like expecting, um like, crops to grow where no seeds have been planted. Um but it's also, I think, to say that, like, okay, well, we've had this explosive growth in the movement in libertarians, um, but but it hasn't had results in policy. Well, yeah, because as explosive as it's been, like there's just like a lot of room to grow. Like there's just like needs to be a lot of growth to have that kind of results in public policy. But then the answer to that is not like, okay, well, we need to give up on education, because if we give up in education, then that explosive growth will reverse, and we'll have a smaller base of people who are libertarians, and then we'll just be like further away from there being kind of any kind of policy change. So yeah, I do think that people can change, and people have changed. um, you know, Even like people like Ludwig von Mises, he said that he was a statist when he was first a student, and it was really only like from reading people like Menger and learning from people like Böhm-Bawerk that he became like an icon of classical liberalism. And then Hayek was basically like a socialist until he read Mises's Socialism, and then he changed his mind. And um and so so yeah, so people can change, people have changed, and people, you know God willing, will change if we keep um you know changing ourselves first and foremost, and thereby inspiring them to change by inspiring them to learn, and by sharing our learning with them.
Do you think it's the case that, um, people are either individualists or collectivists by, their nature? It's just kind of inborn into their genetics or psychology or whatever it may be. And then that goes and shapes the ideas that take over the world, whether that's, communism or libertarianism or whatever it may be? Or do you think it's that, the course of history leads to certain ideas, and then people are shaped by the ideas that they're exposed to? And I suppose it doesn't have to be all one or the other, but these are two differing perspectives that each of you have expressed over the course of the show. So, um, Adam, why don't you take this one first?
Well, that sounds like the ages-old dichotomy between nurture and nature. Um, you know, uh, I have a pretty firm view on that. I think collectivism and individualism are two categories of human nature, basically. In other words, we have both of them within us. And that's part of my closing statement that I'd like to read. But as I've mentioned before, the individualism, as I understand it, comes from the fact that I only experience my own consciousness directly, and collectivism comes from the fact that there's millions of other people that I see whose consciousness I do not experience directly. Clinton's famous statement, "I feel your pain," which was meant as a tongue-in-cheek joke, because you actually do not feel the other person's pain. So for everybody else out there, I actually do not I can empathize. I could try to feel how they feel, but I actually never do feel how they. I sleep at night. There's billions of people going through all sorts of bad things. I know I have no idea what's going on. It doesn't affect me negatively in any way at all. I sleep right all to the next morning. So collectivism comes from the idea that if there are millions and billions of other consciousnesses like mine, then my consciousness is insignificant in the face of that. That's collectivism. Individualism is the opposite, is that since I only experience my own consciousness in its primary, and I'm pretty suspect, and I'm skeptical about the other ones because I've never experienced them. It's not that I don't grant each person has one, but it's just secondary to me. I never felt another person's pain or their joy. So individualism comes from the recognition of that fact. So those two things are categorically there in human nature. And then, as Jake, you kind of were touching on, then historically or culturally, that could be influenced back and forth. Are there epochs where that could be more influential? One of those could be more influential or less. So I think you could see, we might all, three of us agree that right now we're heading more towards collectivism. I'll give you an example of why. Right now, the left is using the word collectivism left all the time. Every other day, you can read an article. On the right, they're not using the word individualism. They do sometimes. I saw an interview that Brett Weinstein did with a guy named Burke in England. He's part of Restore UK. And that gentleman specifically mentioned individualism. But on the right side of the aisle, libertarian side of the aisle, it's pretty rare. Individualism has a bad name. But that's because we're living the age of collectivism, and collectivists have been successful in giving individualism a bad name. So I agree with Dan that in the sense that, yes, there could be a renaissance of what I call individualism, in which basically it's enlightened self-interest, in which the individual is now freed. We have trust amongst each other in society to behave correctly and have responsibility, but have freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. As collectivism grows or becomes pervasive, that trust is gone. You do not trust your fellow citizen to make decisions because, as a leftist would say, they're going to screw it up. So the way you do that is you control that. You use the legal system to minimize the decisions that individuals are allowed to make. So I hope I've answered it. I think that collectivism and individualism are universal categories that come from our fundamental human nature. And that, yes, culture and historical situations situating can influence whether we're living in a collectivist age or an individualist age. The Mises age of liberalism from 16, Dan had told us, from 16, whatever it was, to 18, whatever it was, the age of liberalism, that was an individualistic age, I assume. I'm not a 100% huge scholar of history, but I know that the age of collectivism, the collectivist counteroffensive, if you will, or resurgence came with Marx and has now been accelerating and is in the ascendancy right now. So that's our challenge as libertarians: is we're not living in a libertarian age. We're not living in the age of liberalism. We're living in the age of collectivism increasingly. So what to do? What should we do given that?
Yeah, so the way I see it, I mean, I kind of I see where like Thomas Jefferson was coming from when in his letter he said that there are people who by disposition are like Whigs, or as we'd say libertarian, versus Tories, which is kind of like the more collectivist way of thought at the time. And he traced it from sort of a constitutional timidity versus courage, basically, that that people who are dispositionally timid, that they need like big daddy government to like take care of them, whereas people who are more courageous, that they that they they take a they courageously trust other people to do the right thing, more or less, and they have like greater faith in their fellow man to be able to live in harmony with each other. um to I'm not sure how true that is, but to the extent that it's true, I think education still really matters, because the way I would see that is that, like, okay, well, let's say like ideology is like a line um that goes infinitely in both like left and towards the left. Let's say that's towards big government, and then towards the right, let's say that that's like freedom. and and so and then let's say that any given human population is like a line segment on that line. And so based on disposition, some people may always be on towards the left of that line segment, or if they're dispositionally collectivist, or to the right of that line segment if they're dispositionally individualist. But then what education determines and what the prevailing ideology determines is where on the line segment itself is. And so like if collectivist ideas are prevailing, then the whole line segment will be shifted way to the left. And then so then the collectivists on that line segment will be like super collectivist, and the people on the right of that line segment will still be pretty collectivist, but not as much so. But then if individualist ideas prevail and libertarian ideas prevail, then the whole line segment will be on the right of that line. And then people who are naturally individualists will be like super individualists, and people who tend towards collectivism, they'll still be pretty individualist, but just not as much as their compatriots. And so I think that's why that even though there are dispositional collectivists and individualists, if that's the case, that like in the age of liberalism, when Adam Smith had just popularized the economic way of thinking and popularized the ideas of free trade, and John Locke's ideas were in terms of rights were reigning supreme, that the whole line segment was shifted way to the right. But then as those ideas waned, and as like Marx's ideas became more prevalent, and Fabian socialists and technocratic progressives, then the whole line segment moved to the left. And so that's kind of, I think it could be true that whether someone is more collectivist or more individualist is a matter of disposition, or even like a matter of heredity. But that's still doesn't matter in terms of what's the best strategy, because you could, even if you lean collectivist, there's still a big question of how collectivist you will actually be. And the same thing with if you lean individualist, and how much of an individual society and a collectivist society we have is still determined by education.
Dan, I have a follow-up question for you there, which is everything you're saying like makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the line segments, or we call it, the Overton window, shifting left or right. In certain historical periods, basically all of history, where humans have had a more unified culture. I'm wondering if you see if anything has changed in regards to that in this era of hyperpolarization, where people go and form these internet communities where they're all kind of talking amongst themselves, rather than feeling and interacting as part of a society with people that reflect the full range of that Overton window. Do you think anything has changed in regards to this theory in more modern times?
Yeah, I could see that being the case. And I think then that is just a matter of the line segment being longer, and there being more of a range. But even in that case, I still think it matters where the line segment is. And it might be the case where, people on opposite ends of that very long line segment, can't really be in the same society. And so then we need some kind of a secession. And that may be the case, and secession and jurisdictional polycentrism is a great solution for that, and I think we need more of that anyway, regardless. but I still think it still matters where that line segment is on the continuum.
So we've talked a lot at this point about how people are or are not libertarians and trying to make them and the world more libertarian. A meta question behind all of that you guys have had some disagreement on over the course of the show is the moral good of libertarianism an objective truth, or is that just a subjective preference and some people have different preferences? Dan, you want to go first on that one?
Sure. I mean, I've always agreed, like, back to the forum days when Adam and I first met. I've always agreed with Mises that value is subjective, that all value is subjective, and that there's no such thing as an objective value. Um, and but I do think that there can be a harmony of subjective values, um, and that there is an objective human nature that is so common among humans that it lends itself to a harmony of subjective values. And so I think that human nature is such that, you know, all humans act, all humans live under scarcity, all humans live under the law of comparative advantage, and and because of these economic laws and these other traits of human nature, it's such that if people understood these laws, that they would prefer liberty. That almost universally everyone would prefer liberty according to their own subjective preferences. And so that's why I think education is still the important approach, because if even to the degree that collectivists and individualists have different preferences, like it's largely because that they just have different understandings of economics, that a lot of socialists actually believe that socialism will work and will lead to themselves and lead to the proletariat like being better off, even though they think that it will be at the expense of like the capitalist class. But that's just not the case. And so I think that I think that even though it's all a matter of subjective value, that like Mises said, that we all tend to subjectively value like wealth over poverty, and being well fed over hunger, and health over sickness. um and because of that um underlying harmony of well understood interests, that if we could just get individuals to understand what actually is in their interest, given their subjective values, that we could come to an agreement.
So, Dan, I have in my notes here some stuff about you talking about this harmony of interests and persuading people to libertarianism. But I also have that, you're a believer in the natural law perspective on libertarianism. So that wasn't exactly the answer that I was expecting you to give. Do you think, forgetting the persuasion side of it, do you think in terms of moral truth, do you think that libertarianism derives from natural law? Do you take a Rothbardian perspective on this? Basically, are you a moral realist, or no?
Yeah, so I have an article where I explain how I kind of see a reconciliation of utilitarianism and natural law and like religious conceptions of morals as well. And so for me, I think I do disagree with sort of like the moral realists, um, like Rothbard and like Rand, where there is basically some kind of like an objective value, and that you could um that natural like that there is a natural law in the sense that like if you don't have these values, then you are objectively wrong according to that natural law. I do think that there is a natural law in the sense that, like I said, that humans do have a nature, that there is such a thing as human nature, um, and that you know, given that human nature, that the libertarian order is the order in which human beings would tend to have their subjective preferences satisfied the most. So that's what I mean by natural law. That I do believe that there's a human nature, and I do believe that if people understood that nature, then they would subjectively choose libertarianism. Um, and I think that it is God that gave us that human nature. Um, and so and so I think that that's the sense in which I believe that we have God-given rights, in the sense that God gave us a nature according to which certain norms, these certain rights, are the best for our subjective preferences. That's my position.
Okay, so there may or may not be as much disagreement here as I thought there was going to be, but Adam, what's your perspective on all that? Libertarianism, objective moral truth, or just a subjective preference some people have and some people don't?
Well, first of all, when you describe libertarianism either as an objective truth or a subjective preference, you're already involved in theory. So you're saying, well, listen, there's this thing called libertarianism, and here's how I'm going to describe it. So now we're into theory. And the theory, the intellectual training that both Dan and I have had, and what led Dan to some of his conclusions that he's just stated, is that there's some really, really difficult theoretical and practical problems with viewing libertarianism as an objective truth. First of all, if I had to say that I see objective truth and my opponent does not see the objective truth, I've obviously just set myself up as the arbiter of truth. And of course, then that person can just do the same thing and say that that doesn't get us anywhere, because everybody, and if you can be objective, the one who sees objective reality, which is the favorite term of a realist, and then that means automatically that the other person doesn't see objective reality. Everybody knows which one of those you want to be. So it's just kind of it doesn't really get you anywhere. It's kind of almost name calling. But there's also a more serious flaw, is that if you are intellectually honest and you get your piece of paper out and your pen and you try to explain why libertarianism or there is an objective truth, or your morality is objectively true or right, you're going to find invariably that the only way you can try to prove that is through a utilitarian argument, because what you'll have to do is you'll put down and say, what I like, my libertarianism or my values are objectively true because X. So now you've set up ends and means. So as soon as you do that, you realize, if you're intellectually capable, I would say, and intellectually honest, you realize that you haven't solved the problem, because you have just basically said, well, if I accept this as my goal, then this is right or good. I'll give you an example. The most simple example we can have in libertarianism and economics is, well, if we do socialism and try to equalize everybody's going to be dirt poor. So, so therefore, you're telling me, the socialist, that I have a value choice to make. If I want absolute equality, I have to accept absolute poverty. If I want to avoid absolute poverty, I have to accept wealth inequality. As a libertarian, I value my freedom more than I do equality of outcomes in society. So, but it's an empirical fact that a leftist is willing to accept poverty if they could get absolute equality. You just see it again and again in history. So when we describe libertarianism theoretically, we are going to fail unless we describe it as a value choice that each of us makes. There is no objective. If you want to be theoretically consistent and not have your theory be a bad theory and be easily contradicted, you're going to be forced to conceive libertarianism as a value choice that each individual has to make. So as long as I'm willing to accept the bad consequences of my choice, or the invariable consequence of my choice, if I want individual freedom, I'm going to have to accept wealth disparity. If I want socialism, I'm going to have to accept poverty. But I can choose either one. If I want to choose socialism and have poverty, you could see in Cuba, they haven't changed their mind. The leaders and a lot of in society haven't changed. They're dirt poor, and they refuse to change their ideology. So now some people did, and when communist China, eventually somebody did say, well, wait, I don't think we just want to have one rice bowl and a Mao outfit for the next century. Somebody said that, said we're not going to do that. They could have kept going. I mean, that's their decision. So to end this discussion, or this question, to answer it, I wouldn't say whether libertarianism is an objective truth or our moral truths are objective truths. I would say that when we go to write about them and conceive them and discuss them, our theories are not going to be effective, and they're not going to be consistent unless we conceive them as choices, value choices that we make. We call that subjective value. That doesn't mean random value. Subjective value means that you can trace every choice back to an individual. So a subjective value just means a value that I can assign to somebody. So Adam's subjective value, the value of the subject Adam, the value chosen by the person Adam, is libertarianism. I value freedom more than material equality. I'm at ideological war with those who have chosen material inequality of all people above freedom. So that's my ideological opponent.
What is the role of the non-aggression principle in all of this? That is typically the way that libertarians, not all libertarians, but historically most libertarians, have grounded their argument. Some sort of searching for some kind of moral truth that most people would agree on, and then deriving down from there. But there's also a lot of criticism of the non-aggression principle. And if the non-aggression principle isn't the right way to do that, what is the right way to help people get to, a fully more libertarian thinking. Adam, I think that can kind of pick up a little bit from where you left off. So do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I want to say that I agree with those who use the term non-aggression principle, in those libertarians who use that, in that they have identified vaguely, in my opinion, the source of the problem. The source of the problem is that it, if I'm doing nothing to harm someone and doing nothing wrong, let's say, I'm doing no criminal behavior, then I'm not expecting somebody to come at me with any kind of force or aggression or coercion, however you want to say it. Somebody shouldn't be harming me if I'm not harming them. So I agree with the idea of the non-aggression principle. Where I disagree with it is, um, as soon as they, and they do, conceive it normatively. So now we have a problem, because I'm pretty sure that they're going to make sure that the non-aggression principle is defined in such a way that they never that they never actually commit aggression. And I think that's theoretically not going to work, because I think if anybody were to seriously write it down on paper, in discussion, there's lots of gray areas and lots of fudging. But if the truth is, the proof is in the pudding. When you write it down in an essay form, 10 pages or 100 pages, we're going to be able to then have time to look and see how the ideas fit together. The non-aggression principle, in my opinion, is dead end, a dead end moralist normative attempt to describe what's wrong with non-libertarian society. I'm not doing anything wrong. I homesteaded my house, and then these guys on horses came over from the village and said, "Hey, we're from the other town. You're now subject to the laws." We had a vote over there in town. We unanimously passed a vote that everybody in this town is going to be taxed 50%. You're in this town, you're now going to be taxed 50%. So non-aggression principle says, "Hey, you're aggressing on me." And so they're trying to rightfully, and I feel, object and come to terms with this on a normative basis. To me, the proper approach, which is theoretically consistent, is to arrive at a conception of what's happening, which I call coercion, that we all do. That's a formal definition that actually everybody could agree on, just like we all agree on mathematics, let's say, or on what Dan's calling human nature. We can all agree that there's people are both happy, can be happy or sad, that they can make achievements or have setbacks. There's certain categories that we can all agree on. As I've described when we've talked, coercion is a trade and it's universal. We all have done it and we've all experienced it. In coercion, I say, "Listen, I'd like to get something from you, so I'm going to threaten some sort of harm to you." This is one way I can get something from you, is I can threaten a harm, and then I can say, "Listen, I'll withdraw the harm if you give me what I want." That's coercion. We all do it. It's a universal thing because it deals with universal categories. A threat of harm is a universal category of human action. We all do it. We've all been subject to it. Trade is a universal category of human action. And so wanting to get something from someone. There's many different ways we can try to get something from someone. We can persuade them. We can just hope that they're just going to give us something. But a very effective way to do it is to threaten something so harmful that they have to get it withdrawn. The most harmful one you can do, for example, is point a gun at somebody. That's very effective because most people do not want to be shot. And then you can say, "Listen, I'm pointing this gun at you. I'm going to shoot you if you don't do what I want. Now give me what I want." The person gives you what they want, then you withdraw. If you're using coercion, you withdraw, then you withdraw the harm. If you just shoot them, then that's just assault or murder. So the non-aggression principle, to me, is a faulty libertarian theory, but a virtuous attempt to identify what the problem was, which is, why is somebody coming and using force against me? As Ayn Rand said, the initiation of force, when I didn't initiate force against them, it's unfair. This is pre-theoretically, before you even start to do libertarian theory. It's just, I was just tending my garden. You guys came across the mountain and told me I had to pay 50%. Where's that coming from? Why can't I go across the mountain and tell you to make a law and say you're not allowed to charge me 50%? Where's the equality? So it's obviously not fair because you get to tell me what to do and I don't get to tell you what to do. If I did get to tell you what to do, the first thing I'd say is, you can't tell me what to do. So a non-aggression principle is an attempt to grapple with what all libertarians feel is unfair, which is that if we're peaceful people, we shouldn't be subjected to forceful treatment.
So I subscribe to the non-aggression principle. I do understand why, like, some people have found it unconvincing or overly reductive. I think largely because they don't analyze the principle enough. That even though it is sort of like a useful axiom to then derive to then um, apply to all manners of questions about human interaction, and like whether any kind of human interaction is considered just, and consistent with libertarianism, including like government policies. Um, I think that it's important to then analyze the non-aggression principle by analyzing what is aggression, and um, and why aggression as something that should be prohibited be defined in that way, because then it gets back to rights and it gets back to human nature. That aggression means, like Adam said, initiating force against someone's person or property. But then that presupposes the premise of something either being one's person or property or not. It presupposes a moral theory about, like, okay, well, how does one rightfully own something or not? Um, and and so to me, like, a theory of rights is prior to a theory of like the non-aggression principle, because you need to have that theory before you even can understand what aggression means. um and I think that that can be more convincing to break it down into that, because then you can break down, like, why does any given theory of rights make sense? Why is it compelling? Why is it something that we should adopt? And I think that that can be pretty clearly made. A case for that could be pretty clearly made. That, like John Locke said, each individual should have a property in his or her body. And I think that that's pretty clear why that should be the case, because every individual has a unique relationship to one's own body that just cannot be, like, replaced. That, if we had a set of rights that said that, Jake, that you own my body and I own your body, well, obviously that's a really clumsy arrangement, because I'm going to, like, be constantly needing to, like, tell you in words exactly what I want you to do with your with my body that you're in, and vice versa. And it's just much more efficient for us to each own our own body, because we have a more intimate and direct connection with our own bodies, and things will just be much more smooth and easy and efficient and harmonious, um, that way. So I think it's pretty clear that we should have that right, and it should be unalienable. That I don't think I don't think people should be able to sell themselves into slavery. Um, and then alienate their self-ownership to transfer title to one's own body to someone else because of that intimate relationship that doesn't exist with external goods. It does make sense for us to be able to transfer title to um to other goods. That if I were to able to sell this pen to Adam, and he was able to reciprocally transfer title of monetary units to me, and because I don't inhabit this pen, like this pen can be just as efficiently used by Adam as it could be by me, and so title should be transferable of external goods. Um, but then there's a question of like, well, how should we initially establish title in external goods? And I think like Hoppe makes the case that like the homesteading principle, like the first user or first occupier or first improver, um, makes more sense than any other conceivable principle. Because what else are you going to say that like the second user then should have complete title to it? Like that just doesn't make any sense. Like that, um, that would lead to chaos. That would be like a bad norm. Um, or should it be like mixed, where like, you know, the first user only has a limited title and a limited claim, but then other people have all these other competing claims? Well, that has all sorts of like moral hazard and just incentive um problems. And so that this basic theory of like who owns what, that is basically what Locke said, um that just from a utilitarian standpoint, that makes the most sense. And so again, I think that there's kind of like this false choice between like natural rights and utilitarianism, because rights that are natural to the human condition are going to lead to humans flourishing more. And so, and then assuming you're conceiving of those rights being the ideal rights, well, then that leads to a very sound idea of the non-aggression principle, because that means you shouldn't you shouldn't initiate force against someone's person or property with that set of rules about how something becomes one's property and what is one's person, underlying that. And then there can be like a utilitarian basis for the non-aggression principle based in human nature. And so and based in our God-given nature. So again, I just think it all fits together. Um, so yeah, so I just, you know, I disagree with Adam that I don't think the concept of aggression is any less scientific than the concept of coercion. In fact, I think it's more exact than the concept of coercion, because libertarians aren't against coercion as coercion, because, you know, we're for coercing someone to give back stolen property. Like, so that the subtlety of like initiating force against someone's person or property, which is what aggression means, that's more descriptive of what libertarians actually want.
So, switching gears, the title of this show is Permissionless Liberty, named after Adam's concept that he has elaborated on throughout the course of the show. That sparks a meta question, which is, to what extent, for accomplishing libertarianism, do we have to deal with the government and the people that we have, or is that something libertarians can join together and kind of just work around? Can you build a libertarian society inside of an unfree one? Or, if you have all these people that don't support libertarianism controlling the state, will they crush any attempt to do permissionless liberty? Basically, can permissionless liberty work? So, Adam, let's have you start this one off, of course, but you know we don't have to go through the entire concept of permissionless liberty again. um, so so I guess just try to give the summary argument of why you think it can work given the obstacle of the state and a surrounding unlibertarian society.
Right. In my opinion, it definitely can work, but there's intellectual obstacles because um, let's say so let's go the first obstacle. Let's say we can get past it. The first obstacle is I think I'm going to try to achieve libertarianism by getting ourselves control of the government apparatus and start making libertarian laws or start altering the existing legal system. That's definitely a conception of libertarianism that has existed, Cato Institute, et cetera, et cetera. Those are mainstream libertarians, let's say. They view libertarianism as a set of value choices within the existing overarching system. But let's say, and I think that's never going to work, and I think experience shows that. But let's say we get past that. There's a second obstacle, and that is that I'm pretty sure, well, I'm not, no, the second obstacle will be that the conception of libertarianism in terms of coming up with a substitute for mainstream society that has freedoms that libertarians want and also its own structure of compulsion, its own government that's quote unquote libertarian. So you say, well, there's mainstream society that we have some freedoms. I get to go to Walmart or Target. I get to buy a blue shirt or a red shirt. I can go from state to state without showing documentation. I have freedoms. But then there's the government that enforces a whole bunch of rules or laws. So the second obstacle is now I conceive libertarianism in terms of having a freedom component and a compulsion component. So that those are intellectual obstacles that I feel that we're never going to get off the ground without getting past. So here's how I think we get past it. We accept that mainstream society, non-libertarian society, is generating, as I've mentioned, as I've tried to argue, restrictions. That's what this whole thing's about. It's like Monday morning, there's going to be 10,000 new laws in the United States, and the Monday after that as well. So I advocate a vision of libertarianism where we only generate freedoms. We don't generate any restrictions because the restrictions are already, first of all, we have an entire legacy system that where most of the things we're interested in outlawing are against the law. I mean, murder, fraud, arson, all the nasty things that people can do to one another are already against the law. Polluting, throwing 10 billion pounds of poison into the river. That's already against the law. So there's an entire legacy system that has already outlawed the things that a lot of us want to be. We're okay with the fact that there's this clumsy system that we're not maybe advocates of, and that maybe it's hurting us in different ways, and maybe it's super inefficient, but it's already meting out penalties for bad behavior in ways that we by and large agree with. So where we disagree is that with mainstream society is that as society progresses, they're only interested in generating more restrictions. And even when we vote our right people in, they just go and start making more restrictions. They use the legislative process to create restrictions. So I advocate where I'm going with this is that if you lift the burden from yourself of coming up with a system of restrictions that already exists, the task at hand becomes much easier because generating freedoms is very inexpensive. For me to control another person is extremely expensive and time consuming. For me to form a voluntary agreement is very, very inexpensive and not time consuming. So the pathway that I see towards a libertarian society um, is that Dan's 10,000 Bastiats would not just do scholarship, but they'd actually take action. Said, well, we're not going to have speech regulations amongst this 10,000 of us. They'd be 10,000 freedom fighters who would establish a relationship and to say we're not going to be subject to speech regulations in the relationship between us 10,000, and nobody can make us do that. There's no laws. There's really no compulsion that could make 10,000 people accept a regulation between them. It would be way too expensive to enforce, but way too inexpensive to circumvent or to disobey. So there is we talked about the idea of civil disobedience. It's a technique that's akin to that. I call it peer-to-peer liberty. And I've recently written an essay that shows, and I think I tried to read it or did read it to you guys, how as the regulations are mounting in government, they're doing the same thing. They're basically, the regulations have gotten so thick that when I'm voted into office as a government official, my hands are tied. There's so many things I want to do. They're legislatively already actually prohibited. So what I can do as a government official is I can work in combination with other government officials to say, listen, if I do this or if I let somebody else do this, you don't have to prosecute me. So then I can work extra legally, and that's what's happening in our society now, because as the laws and regulations have mounted, we libertarians have only been treating that how it's affected our individual liberty and our commercial activity, our businesses. We never actually thought about the fact that one of the problems with socialism and communism is that the laws mount so high that when a government comes into power, 80% of what it wants to do is prohibited by law. So what do? They basically do a thing where they grant each other a exemption by not prosecuting each other, and they act above the law. So they're actually more free than us because they have the freedoms that we have. They can go to Walmart or Target, buy a red shirt or a blue shirt, go state to state without documentation. But then they also do the things where they grant each other these exemptions. So it's actually ironic, sadly ironic, that we libertarians who want to do things voluntarily that are outlawed, we operate within the restrictions, and then the government is already ahead of us in implementing a system of mutual exemption granting from the existing legislation, knowing that they wouldn't be able to get anything done if they actually followed the law. So that's how Biden imported those people. That's how Fauci did. Everything Fauci did was extra legal. And he was supported because the Democrats in power would not prosecute him. The FOIA, like I've been arguing, the FOIA requests, they just send you a redacted paper. It's prohibited by law. They're supposed to give you the actual text, but who's ever in charge of prosecuting lets them do it. So they're acting basically extra legally. But we as libertarians are afraid to do it because we're afraid, as Joe Strummer said, nobody wants to go to jail. So we're afraid to do what actually our opponents are already doing, which is to act, in a sense, extra legally for libertarian values, like let's just use freedom of speech. We're just going to, when the speech regulations come, we're just going to obey them instead of saying, no, me and Jake and Dan are not going to have speech regulations. We have a libertarian society. Did I answer the question?
I think so. There's a lot there.
I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I know I said something.
You definitely got around the question in its important attributes. So, Dan, your broad thoughts on the strategy of permissionless liberty and to what extent it's plausible for libertarianism to rise up within a hostile surrounding state and society.
Yeah, this is where there's, I think, a lot of overlap between Adam's view and my view, because, I've talked about how education is a necessary prerequisite towards any kind of policy change. But I don't think that it's direct. Like, I don't think it's through voting or through lobbying or anything like that. Like, I don't think it's a matter of like, oh well, we change people's ideas through education, and so then they vote differently, and so then the politicians, you know, abolish laws and have like more freedom based laws. Um, what I think actually has happened much more than that, has been disobedience, civil disobedience, black market disobedience, gray market disobedience, and that happens even if it's just at the margin. Um, those disobedient people are sort of like the pioneers of liberty. And it's sort of like a canary in the coal mine for the government, because I think what happens is that learning creates ideological change. And then on the margin of that ideological change, there are people who are just um, not just disobeying, um, and disrespecting the laws because they see them as as disreputable. They see them as unjust laws, and a lot of people who are still complying with the laws, they agree with them. And so what I think happens is that the government sees that, and they realize that they are losing their mandate, that they're losing their legitimacy. And so then, like, not because of like voters punishing them, but more so because they don't want laws on the books um that are being flouted. Like, they don't want dead letter laws on the books because it just becomes a mockery of their rule. And they don't want that. They want to be taken seriously. And so they roll back, so as to avoid that, um, and to avoid any kind of like conflict that this kind of disobedience will cultivate. um like if, people who are in the black market, in the gray market, who are disobeying, who are keeping their guns, even against gun control laws, that that they don't that they get the sense that ideology has changed to the point where if the government were to fully enforce these laws, like Adam was saying, that it's just too costly. That it would be too costly in terms of conflict, and in terms of like the resources that they'd have to expend to enforce these laws. So they would rather just roll back the laws so that it doesn't become a conflict. And I think that's really where education leads to liberty, is that it leads to like a a populace that is less tolerant of tyranny. And so then tyrants roll back, not because they believe in liberty, and not even because they want to appease voters who believe in liberty, but more so they don't want to um, run into that intolerance of liberty, that they don't want to have to spend the resources, have the fights that would be necessary to enforce these laws. But then they also don't want unenforced laws on the books, because again, it just makes a mockery of them. So then they just start abolishing laws. Like, I think that I think that's where Adam's and my views really meet, because I think it's education that will lead to people pursuing permissionless liberty, and that it's permissionless liberty that will lead to politicians rolling back the tyranny.
Okay, so in your view, those things are more compatible and therefore it doesn't have to be one or the other. So we're going to get into the final three questions here to wrap this up. So after now 32 episodes of this show, where has your thinking most changed, most been revised, most been updated by the other? Dan, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I haven't changed any of my positive positions. Like, I still believe everything that I believed before, but I have something that's new that I hadn't even thought of before, that I'm excited about, because I think Adam's vision of these agreements, these non-state based, just mutual agreements for, liberties that are agreed upon, that I don't know if this is exactly the way Adam is seeing it play out, but the way I kind of see it is sort of like a shadow society. Like, even if these arrangements aren't completely able to be lived up to, because, like, even if two people have an agreement with each other about, like, the minimum wage or free speech, that it's still possible that a government will just annul that, because the governments will say, like, okay, well, you two may not want to impose minimum wage laws on each other, but that's because you, the employer, are exploiting you, the employee, and we can't allow that to happen. So we're going to still enforce minimum wage laws, or still enforce speech restrictions. But I think that even in that case where the employee is accepting something above a minimum wage, um, it still can be the case where, like, okay, well, that's just because this government is getting in between us. Like, I still will honor my agreement with you, my employer, that I will never force you to pay above a minimum wage, and that I will never, like, call on the power of the government to force you to do that. That I individually respect your right to pay, to contract for whatever rate makes sense to you. And so that, if that agreement is in writing, I think that could create, like, kind of like a shadow society, where it's like, okay, well, as soon as the government is out of the way, then this agreement comes fully into force. And that, I think, would solve the problem that a lot of people have about, you know, government stepping away, is that, okay, well, what takes its place? Like, do we have, like, anarchy in the bad sense? Is it just like chaos if we don't have, like, a court system and laws on the books anymore, because the state that that set up that court system and set up those laws has withdrawn? Well, if we have sort of like shadow, like, not completely into effect contracts on the books, and agreements on the books, and sort of like implicit laws based on those agreements, then there isn't that fear anymore. It's like you can have like the government withdraw, and there it won't be just chaos because there's all this documentation, all this agreement already in writing, and that'll just say like, okay, like this is what we agreed to live by. If there wasn't a government getting in the way, now there doesn't have to be a government in the way, and we still have these rules to live by, and so it will be orderly. It won't devolve into chaos. And I think that would make people just be a lot more comfortable with the idea of not having this huge Leviathan state, because there is that sort of backup society just ready to just load.
Adam, your thoughts on where Dan has most changed, updated, revised your thinking?
Well, as maybe you guys have gathered by now, I mean, I've had pretty strong views on things, and I've developed them over the last 30 years. And so, I've been a little bit of an intellectual opponent of rights theory. I'm definitely a sworn intellectual opponent of Rothbard for things I've written about. Um, so that's not my vision or my school of libertarianism, as I would say it. But what's been wonderful working with Dan is he's much more educated than I am on the history of our movement, and retains a great reservoir of knowledge. And I just haven't. That's not my strength. And so it's been wonderful to basically have a history teacher with us on the libertarian movement. And of course, we admire our wonderful founders, and some of our towering intellectuals, or even what are the people that we aspire to be like Leonard Read, et cetera, Henry Hazlitt, et cetera. We share an admiration for them. But I think what I've really appreciated most is Dan's knowledge, historical knowledge, and knowledge of the movement, and that it's not Dan's fault that I'm inflexible and have very uh, very clear views that I will have a hard time parting with. That's just I'm not an easy person in that way. I have very well defined views that I've worked on for a long time and tried to make more consistent. So it's hard for me to change those. But Dan's saying, hey, listen, he's a rights theory libertarian, and that's how he approaches it. As I see things, as I think I've mentioned, I see libertarianism as a broader movement. I define libertarianism broadly. So therefore, Ayn Rand is a libertarian. Ludwig von Mises is it doesn't matter if they call themselves one. In my theory, a libertarian is one who wants to be left alone if they're providing value and not harming anybody. So Elon Musk partially qualifies as a libertarian in that sense. Anybody who's expressing "leave me alone because I'm providing value to society," that's a libertarian sentiment. They become libertarian to that extent to me. Panarchism is libertarian. Anarcho-capitalism is libertarianism. Like I said, Ayn Rand. Anybody who feels oppressed by culturally and historically developed government structures and wants to be and starts to figure out how they could escape from those, even if they are a leftist or a communist. And for example, it's a libertarian phenomenon that governments now are acting extra legally because they realize that the legislative process would be too cumbersome for them to achieve their goals. And so now they're looking for alternatives, what I call peer-to-peer liberty. In other words, they're saying, listen, we can make an agreement between us. If I let those people across the border, you don't have to prosecute me, which is exactly what happened, 4 years ago. So what was that? That was basically to get legislatively to make it legal by legislation was not going to work. It was a dead end. But yet they strongly believed, it's all family. It's good. It's all good stuff. They believed that in these goals very strongly, that these were morally right things to do. Or maybe they're also just bad people lying and cheating. But let's just assume that the values that they were trying to achieve in their mind were virtuous, give them the benefit of the doubt. So, but legislatively, they knew they couldn't do it. So what did they do? They went and went between themselves. Now, the outside world, myself and other people, were very angry about it. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. You're a criminal. You're a fraud. You're this. You're that. But they took that heat and became more free than us because, as I said, they had all the freedoms that we have, but then they had additional freedoms now because now they got to do something else, which is actually prohibited by law. So I forgot where I'm going with this. I forgot what the question was that prompted me, but so I don't want to keep rambling, but I'll close it there.
What should a libertarian who wants to make a difference, maybe a young libertarian who just really wants to hit the ground running and bring change, what would you advise them to do with the next 10 years of their life? Dan, you go first.
I'd say study and communicate the ideas. Ultimately, that's what spreads these ideas, and that's ultimately it's ideas that change actions. So yeah, I'd say, read, listen to podcasts, listen to talks, and then really try to master the ideas that you come across that make the most sense to you, by taking notes and by synthesizing these ideas in your own words and testing whether your synthesis makes sense by putting it out there, by talking to people about these ideas, and by creating posts and start a Substack, post about these ideas on social media, and really try to create content that just makes these ideas abundantly clear, because the more the more comprehensible what are the ideas in your work, the more you clearly comprehend the ideas, and the more people will want to share in your understanding, the more you will become a thought leader, because ultimately that's what I think hasn't been tried. That like Leonard Reed would say, that like Christianity hasn't been tried and found wanting; it's been tried and found difficult and then abandoned. And he said that that's basically the case for libertarianism, that people, and especially the self-improvement, self-study approach to libertarianism, is that people found it, and it is difficult. It's a difficult set of ideas. It's difficult to master economics and to master political philosophy, and but that's what libertarian leaders need to do. Like they need to be thought leaders if people are going to actually embrace libertarian ideas. And so I think that that's what's been missing, because even though we have had like a quote unquote scholarship movement with a lot of people like saying a lot of things about liberty, that like after a certain point, after most libertarians, after they've learned enough to identify as a libertarian, then they tend to just stop learning. They tend to stop studying. They and they tend to start propagandizing and start um, organizing and marketing um, and that's generally largely what's been tried, and I think that's what's failed. That I think if all this time, all this energy that's been directed at activism and organization and propaganda and marketing, that if those people had instead just like what Leonard Read called doing their homework and really became beacons of these ideas, like really became mini Bastiats, that that it would that we would it would have been like a movement that spread even faster than it has. Like I think that it has spread like very very fast, largely because of like the educational efforts of people like Ron Paul. Because even though Ron Paul, um, that he was a politician, that what was really singular about his campaign was that he turned people on to these ideas by sharing these ideas that he himself has been like a really big student of. Like he's just really geeks out over like monetary policy um and the philosophy of war and peace, and that was contagious, and that's really what created the Ron Paul movement, was his principled love of these ideas and these values. And so and that's why we had that like explosion recently in the movement. But I think that since then it's kind of hit the skids, and be and I think it's because it's been less about those ideas that a lot of the movement has not tried to emulate Ron Paul in that regard. So yeah, basically do your homework. And by Leonard Read, what Leonard Read meant, like not homework necessarily in the school, but like put your own house in order, put your own mental house in order. That kind of homework of like really focusing on self-improvement that will lead to others wanting to also focus on self-improvement.
Can you repeat the question again, please, Jake?
For libertarians listening, particularly young libertarians who want to hit the ground running and make a difference, what would you recommend that they do with the next decade of their life?
Well, first, my agreement with Dan is libertarians have a rich and proud and virtuous literary history. When I criticize the libertarian scholarship movement, it's not because I don't like it. It's just because I think it's become ineffective towards in relation to the goal. But our literary history and our scholarship history is a beautiful thing. Whether it's the novels of Ayn Rand, or whether it's the the combined works of Ludwig von Mises, it's beautiful, beautiful work and of high caliber. And so if first, so I can't disagree with anybody who spends a lot of time reading those works. Um, any young person should decide how they want to integrate themselves into the libertarian movement, whatever suits their personality. But I will say one thing. I've been around for a while, and I can save you some time if you're an ambitious libertarian and you wanted to have an ambitious goal, I can tell you what the Holy Grail is and what the problem to be solved is that has not been solved so far. I'm trying to solve it. There's no guarantee that I'm going to succeed. So there's an opportunity for young libertarians to succeed where others have failed. And here's the problem. We have a society in which we have some freedoms and we have some restrictions. The society we have is going in the direction of more restrictions and less freedoms. That's virtually indisputable. The problem that's one problem. The second problem is almost all of the solutions that are practical that can actually happen, let's say in the next 5 years, are solutions that will come about with people who also want to put a system of freedoms and restrictions into place. So the problem with that dynamic, and you'll be able to see it if you think about it and you follow me visually, is that we already know that we have one school of political thought that wants a fully regulated society. So in other words, they actually want to go back to full communism. And I don't mean that morally. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. They want a fully regulated society so that everything the individual does has to be vetted through the legal process and approved. So that's 100%, in other words, 100% government-run society. All of the solutions that we have, the people that we can vote in, if we vote for Trump or we vote for whoever you want to vote for, even Thomas Massie or Rand Paul, they are just going to want to institute a 50%, and they want to do 50% government, 50% freedoms. So if you look at the whole picture, the totality of those people jostling back and forth over time has to go in the direction of more government control, because there's an asymmetry. There's all of mainstream society wants 50-50. Radical left wants full government control. These are two groups that have political influence. Mamdani is making laws. Miss Seattle Mayor is making laws. So they're going towards communism. Then the mainstream is making laws. That's 50-50. When Trump gets in, he doesn't repeal laws, he makes new laws. The laws are mounting. So what's obviously missing, you can see that what's obviously missing, we libertarians see some sort of society that's somehow more free, but it's not well conceived, and it's certainly not practically implemented. There is no libertarian effective implementation of libertarianism. It's just all on the pages of different books, articles, and podcasts. So the Holy Grail, and Patrick, the reason we had Patrick on was because he wrote an essay, and the essay used the phrase elephant in the room, the same phrase that I used in 2007 when I wrote The Present State of Liberty. The elephant in the room is that the 50-50 crowd and the communist crowd are implementing their philosophy into law, into the society. Libertarians aren't. We're a totally scholarship movement. So the Holy Grail, what the problem I'm trying to solve is how to implement a libertarian society. And I'm advocating that the only way that's going to happen is libertarians have to only generate freedoms. We can't come in with a system of restrictions and freedoms. Because that will just add to the overall societal, when you add our restrictions and our freedoms to the 100% restrictions that the other people are going to implement, they're not going away. The whole thing is going to go in the direction of restrictions. So from a visual and a holistic point of view, looking at all of society, the Holy Grail is to institute a freedom generating process, so that as society continues to generate restrictions, we are now generating liberties. We're not right now. We're just complaining that they're not giving us liberty. Well, that's not enough anymore. We have to generate liberties. We have to produce liberties. We're not doing it. So is Adam's solution going to work? Who the heck knows? I hope it's going to work. I think it could, but that's an empirical question. I always like to say, no, low odds are not no odds. So it could work. But if somebody, there's a young libertarian, there's a project worth the next 10 years of your life. How can you, given that it's not going to be allowed, nobody's going to allow you to implement a libertarian society. So given those restrictions, Can you do it? The salmon are jumping up the river. There's a whole bunch of bears up there, and the pictures that I see, the bear is grabbing the salmon when they jump up. So can you be a salmon that gets through the bears that are there, the bears being mainstream society and the communist society? Can you establish a libertarian toehold in actuality, not in books, not in discussions, and not in podcasts? Can you actually institute a libertarian freedom generating social process? That's the holy grail. So any young whippersnapper out there who says, I have an idea, or I think I can do it if I think about it, I put my mind to it. That's what I think's deserving of your time and your energy for the next 10 years.
Okay, last question. What do you want the listeners of this show after 32 episodes, if they can just take away, one thing or one set of things, what do you want it to be? Dan, you go first, and then Adam, you'll have the last word of the show.
Well, I mean, I could say like the same answer to the last question, which is like hit the books. But I would also say, to, be humble, to always be open to being wrong and to being able to learn from other people, even people who have like a different worldview than you, that there's always something that you can learn from, even people who on every other subject conceivably that you disagree with, because I think that I think that this podcast is kind of like an exemplar of that. That that Adam and I have like very different sort of strategies of liberty, and mostly that's what we didn't talk about what we agreed on that much, like because we do like agree on most like policy questions, um, whether or not we have like the same like meta ethical justification for the policy preference, that on the policy question itself, that we're in agreement. Um, but we focused most on the where we disagreed, which is on strategy. And I think that was fruitful, because like if we just focus on what we agree, well, like we can't really learn that much from each other. Like, well, I mean, I guess we could learn like, oh, I agree with you on that policy, but I hadn't considered that point before. And then like, okay, I could use that point myself. You could learn from that, but it's from respectfully listening to someone who has a different opinion from you, and then like explaining why you, even when you don't change your mind, even if it's a matter of just trying to more clearly explain like why you still believe what you do in spite of the arguments that you just heard from that person, well, that's clarifying your position, and it's giving more of a solid grounding to your position, and then that person can do the same. And also that like there still might be something that you hadn't considered at all before and didn't believe in at first at all, because you hadn't even considered it, like what I was saying about sort of the shadow society, like Adam's idea of a permissionless liberty arrangement, like providing that like there can still be overlaps, and also like the overlap of like what I was talking about in terms of permissionless liberty being like the link between education and policy change. like there's always something that you can learn from other people. So make sure that you um, don't treat discourse as an adversarial um, practice, and that you are always in a mutual truth seeking point of view to discourse, as opposed to a achieving victory type of orientation.
And well said, Dan. Um, I was thinking, if a person approaches things thoughtfully, sometimes you can learn something that you didn't even expect. Uh, a great example is that um, what I see going on with government, like what I've explained with them acting extra legally, I could, if I were of a certain type of mind, I'd be spending all my time yelling that they're frauds and corrupt. I'd be yelling corruption at the top of my lungs and just being very, very angry. But by approaching it a certain way, I'm actually seeing it as an opportunity, because I see them as um, operating by certain principles that are actually quite useful, and applicable for libertarians. So anyway, it's just a way, if you pull back from just the hostile combat aspect of things, you can sometimes learn something unexpectedly. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to learn, but hostility and just reflexive combat closes one down to potential learning. Not that if you just sit there and that you're just going to automatically learn, but you're going to close yourself down from learning while you're engaged in combat, I believe. So it behooves someone to not be in combat. Somebody who wants to learn, it behooves you to not be in combat mode, probably. So it depends. If you want to be an intellectual and you want to learn and you want to advance mentally, it's probably best to not be in combat. It's probably best to be doing something other than combat. So, but I had told Jake earlier that I was going to hopefully just read my little 2-page closing statement. But we can still talk a little bit after that. But it's just a summary of what I've been arguing. And I won't take 5 minutes, and then we can proceed and close it down. So I titled this Assent, ASSENT. The libertarian scholarship and debate movement is trying to obtain assent, that is permission, from non-libertarians to proceed with a libertarian or free society. This is not going to happen. Assent will not be granted. 2 primary reasons that assent will not be granted. 1, the method of obtaining goods and services by government requisition and redistribution is perceived as being more certain than the libertarian method of voluntary exchange. Many people don't want to be subjected to the uncertainty of the market and the uncertainty of the voluntary choices of market participants in their pursuit of necessary goods and services. Hey, I might need an expensive surgery one day. I'm not going to leave that up to the chance of some hospital that could turn me down. The government's going to tell them they got to give me that surgery. It's too important to me. So I don't care what Dan and Adam say about voluntary cooperation, libertarian society. Things will get cheaper. If I need that society, I know how I can get it. That surgery, excuse me, I know how I can get it. Government can get it for me. I don't want to listen to all this blather with Adam and Dan. You might get it, you might not. If you're a good person, if you work a lot, you might get it. Insurance might get it for you, might not. No, the government will get that surgery for me. They have a thing called free medical care, and I'm not going to leave it up to chance. So I'm voting socialist or communist. So that's one reason why freedom, why liberty is not going to be granted, because people prefer that method. Many people do, 50%, whatever your number you think it is. 2, collectivism is one of the 2 sides of human nature. There is the individualistic side, my direct experience of my own consciousness, and there is the collectivist side, the consciousnesses of other people that I do not experience. For example, I do not feel your pain, a great Bill Clinton line. The manifestation of collectivism as a political system is communism, which is deference or submission to the group. manifestation of individualism as a political system is libertarianism, the freedom of the individual from the group. Collectivism and this communism will always be with us. It's a part of human nature. In other words, the collectivist side of my consciousness is never going to disappear. It's always going to be there because it's part of who I am. Will always be with us. We cannot argue or educate it away, nor defeat it with force. Likewise with individualism. Individualism will always be with us. I'm always going to feel my own consciousness as primary to the assumed consciousnesses of other people. So individualism is always going to be with us. We're not going to argue it away, or we're not going to defeat it with force either. Individualism and libertarianism must exist simultaneously with collectivism or communism. They are two universal aspects of human nature that manifest as two universally recurring political orientations. So I'm in agreement with Thomas Jefferson. I like to name drop that there's these two universal categories of political thought. They're interpreted differently during different parts of time, left and right. People say there's no such thing. Yes, there is such a thing. I'm sorry, there really is. It's two parts of human nature. You go to every country in the world and they still have that. They have it in England. They had Brexit and Remain. What was that? It was the right and the left side. It was the two categories. It's everywhere. In Germany, they have the AfD and they have the other parties. It's universal. It's our human nature. We have two sides. Liberty is not granted. We cannot expect that liberty will be granted. Liberty must be asserted. In other words, we're not going to get permission, people. We're going to have to do something. We're going to have to assert our liberty. We're not going to argue somebody into giving us permission to have liberty. Not going to happen, folks. Liberty will not be granted because from the communist perspective, to grant individuals liberty would be to relinquish, to let go of the individual's forced participation in the collectivist political system in which goods and services are collectively pooled and redistributed by government. Communism cannot exist without this, and therefore, from a collectivist perspective, liberty can never be granted. So from their perspective, they are correct, because if they believe in a system that of collectively pooled resources, and they believe in a system of equality of material outcomes, they are correct that they're going to need a large government, because human nature does not do that. Human nature will not produce equality of outcomes. It will produce large disparities. There's going to be Elon Musk, and there's going to be the least capable person on the other end of the bill curve who has nothing. That's what human nature will produce. If you want to counteract that, you're going to have a very large government. And if you want to pool resources, you can't have individual liberty. You're going to have communism. So they are, for the values that they have chosen, which is, I want to acquire goods and services, certainly. I don't want to be subject to Adam's voluntary trade. Adam might say no. If Adam's a doctor, he may not agree. Or I may need something badly, like a ride to the other side of town. Adam might say no. I'm going to have government provided transportation and government provided healthcare, because the government will certainly give me those things. Whatever's around, the government will give me a piece of it. I don't care if it's Cuba. There's not much to go around. If there's 20 beans, I'm going to get a piece of one of those beans. And I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I'm willing to have low standard of living as long as I get a piece of whatever's out there. That's the choice that the communists and socialists are making. They're making a value choice. I personally don't want that. I am a proud individualist. I will accept the risk of failure, and I will accept, and I'm okay with being a poor person, which I was for most of my young adult life, while there were many wealthy people in the world. It didn't bother me one bit, because I value my freedom and I trust in my ability. So when I was even 35 years old, I was making $9 an hour. I never felt anything about it. I didn't think it was unfair or anything. I was poorer than almost everybody in my age group. But it didn't bother me, because in my mind, I was capable and I was going somewhere. So it's a different mentality than the collectivist mentality. The timid want protection. The capable want freedom. And those are two different systems. So you're a collectivist. I want to be protected by a government because I'm afraid that I may not be able to get that surgery. If you're self-confident, you say, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'm sure I'm going to find a way to get that surgery if I need it. I'm not worried about it. In the meantime, I have a lot of things I'm working on, and I'm busy. That's the libertarian, and that's the self-assured individualist perspective on things. There's two sides. There's two categories. Okay, violence, hate, hostility, moral condemnation. Though liberty must be asserted, since it won't be granted, the assertion of liberty does not require violence, hate, hostility, or moral condemnation directed toward other people. All that is necessary to initiate a libertarian or free society is for liberty-minded people to begin making and asserting voluntary agreements between themselves. Doing so does not entail necessarily hostile or harmful actions directed toward any other person or toward other people's political systems. So, in other words, these voluntary agreements I'm talking about, it's the other system stays in place. It's the best they can do. My next door neighbors, my extended family, my relatives, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, the system that exists now, that's their best attempt. They all they know how to do is make a law and attach a penalty if you don't do it. If you don't do it, we'll fine you. If you don't pay the fine, we'll come and apprehend you. If you resist, we'll arrest you and throw you in jail. If you resist that, we'll violently attack you. That's the best they can come up with. It's astounding. This is 2026, and we're using the same political technology that's just one step removed from tribal violence. Oh, well, we softened it. First, we're going to fine you. Don't pay that. We're going to apprehend. It's just a softer version. It's just a more drawn out, lengthy version. It's just a system of penalties, of basically of using whatever the most effective weapons are to make some. There has to be a better way. Libertarians have to find a better way. They have to find a better system. As must be emphasized again, initiating, asserting, and sustaining voluntary agreements does not require anger or hostility towards others. It just doesn't. So, Jake, you said before that we all hate the state, and I sympathize with the feeling. The fact is, I don't hate the state because I see it as a bell curve issue. We have on the one end of the bell curve is just brutal tribal society. 150 people. There's the king of the tribe. If you do it wrong, you just get whacked right away. It's just brutal, total savagery. Then we have the middle of the bell curve. That's where we are now. It's a social democracy. Basically, you have to participate. You have to put in 50, 60, 70%. If you don't, we're not going to do what they do in the tribes. We're going to fine you. And then if you don't pay the fine, we're going to, apprehend you, write you a letter. And it's just steps until the violence. So it's just a more, it's institutionalized violence by gradation. I mean, it's definitely, I prefer it to the tribal one. So I'm a fan of it because I don't want to be in the tribal one. That would be really brutal. But the other end of the bell curve is that's what doesn't exist. That's what libertarians are supposed to provide, which is we're not going to do what everybody else is doing. We're not going to do that system. That's what we're against because that's the system that's used to basically prohibit liberty. That system isn't used to foster liberty. It's used to quell liberty. It's used to compel people. It's the system of compulsion, as Mises used to call it. So government can't be used for freedom. Freedom has to be achieved, has to be an emancipation, some sort of emancipation from the existing system. So as I said, initiating, asserting, and sustaining voluntary agreements does not require anger or hostility towards others. I personally feel sorry for my fellow citizens that the stage of cultural and political development they are is low. Then when that system comes after me, I'm not hateful. I try to avoid it. I'm in self-preservation. So I never reach the stage of hate. On the one, it's pity that non-libertarians are so just one step removed from brutality. And then when that system comes after me, it's self-preservation. So I have to move states, or I have to try to take evasive actions. I have to try to protect my wealth and put it out of the reach of an aggressive society who wants to take my wealth away. I never have the hatred because I don't want to have that emotion because I feel that I'm better than that. I don't think I don't want to have that. I don't want to live that way. I don't want to live with hatred. So, and I don't. So I don't hate the state. I don't have any hatred because that's the political system of everybody who's trying their best and they're just not that good at it. And that's, so I have to live in that because I have no, what's the alternative? I mean, there's 350 million people in the United States, and the best they come up with is what we have right now. That's the best they can do. Chuck Schumer, Donald Trump, Elizabeth Warren, Thomas Massey, whoever it is. I don't, that's the best they can do. They got together. And what I'm facing now is they're in the middle of the bell curve. I'm sorry. That's a fact to me. So, thus, there is a path to liberty when liberty is not granted, I assert or I argue. And there is a path to liberty that does not require hostility or anger toward other people, I believe. This is the path that I'm calling peer-to-peer liberty and a polycentric legal order that results from peer-to-peer liberty. To initiate a free society, one need not be educated, one need not vote, one need not argue with anyone or morally condemn them. One need not initiate violence nor wait for society to collapse. To initiate a free society, one only need act voluntarily with other like-minded people. When this happens, a free society will begin. So I made a few tangents and tangents along the way, but that's my closing argument to the jury. You guys are the jury. I don't know if I'm going to win this case today, but I hope that by demonstrating it someday, maybe I could demonstrate it and win the case that way if I can't win it through argumentation. And then I just want to say to everybody who's out there, all 20 people who watch this, or maybe more unbeknownst to me, that we are taking a break for the summer. And I'm open to continuing, but I'm hoping that if we did continue, there would be some development, some excuse or justification, something that happened where we're saying, hey, we really want to talk about X, Y, Z because something, the world, maybe something happened in the world, or maybe it's imperative that we come back on because the world needs us for some reason, or there's some reason. But I think we've laid out our cases pretty, to the best of our ability, and our viewers know where we stand. We each other know where we stand. We've made our case to the jury, which is the viewer, and maybe if some compelling reason happens in the fall, something I don't know what it would be. Hopefully it'd be something positive, but it could be something negative or something we've never thought of comes up, and we say, hey, maybe we should get the podcast back on. This is a good reason to do it. You guys know my phone number and my email address, and I know yours. And I'm going to hopefully continue work with Jake a little bit on. He helps me with graphic design. He doesn't want to help me with my gibberish song. I love the gibberish song.
What do you want? I'll do what you want. We can
I
talk about
emailed
that
you.
after.
I want, because you made a song for me, gibberish song. This is Permissionless Liberty, which I thought was hysterical. I loved it. So I was kidding. I thought because I emailed you I wanted to do one for Adam Knott. This is Adam Knott, Liberty. He's burning up the praxeology. All these.
Maybe I missed that email. Let's send that to me again. We'll talk about it.
Okay. And Dan, we'll just hopefully stay in touch from time to time, the summer and through the fall, especially if some development comes up.
Well, Adam, thank you for this podcast, for the idea of this podcast, for sharing your ideas. It definitely has opened up my thinking to like a whole realm of praxis that is really exciting. So I hope your message finds traction and that maybe you'll build it yourself someday.
Thank you. Yeah, traction. That's a good word. I would like traction. I haven't had a lot of that in my life, and I say that in good humor. But I am seeking traction. I've been pushing. I've been writing for many years. I've been pushing, and I haven't got any pull. Nobody's invited me and say, "Hey, Adam, tell us your stuff." I have to keep trying to push and try to get that. So what I'm trying to get out of life, my holy grail for me would be somebody calls me up and wants me to be on their podcast or to speak to their group. And that's what I'm going to try to accomplish at Freedom Fest. See if I can kickstart my second career in life and not just be a pusher, but be pulled to talk to people, create some demand. But that's hard because every libertarian is a philosopher king. And I think that's what everybody would like, to stand at the podium and say and talk their theory and be a teacher. I want to be a teacher. And so, but you have to earn that right. It's not given to you. You have to earn it. And as my favorite poet, philosopher, musician said, you just haven't earned it yet, baby. I don't know if you know who said that, but the wonderful line that if you're working hard in life and things just don't work, I know what the problem is. You just haven't earned it yet, baby. So he's a wonderful poet. His name was Morrissey, and when he said that, he was talking about me. So that's all I have, folks. Do you have anything, Jake? Any closing remarks, or Dan?
That's it. Thank you so much for watching and listening with us. And maybe we'll be back in the fall. Maybe we won't. But have a good day.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, guys.